The air that night was cold enough to make our breath shimmer in the beam of the lantern. We'd camped deep in the Gallatin range of Montana. Just me, my wife, and our 2 kids, miles from the nearest ranger station. It was the kind of place where the sky felt impossibly wide, and the stars seemed close enough to hear whispering. We'd spent the evening roasting hot dogs over the fire, telling stories, and listening to the low rustle of wind through lodgepole pines. The forest was calm, too calm, in that way that makes your ears prick for what might come next. I remember thinking how perfectly still it was when I crawled into my sleeping bag. That stillness didn't last long. It began with a sound like someone dragging a log through gravel, slow, steady, heavy. The kids were asleep in the next tent, and I froze halfway out of my sleeping bag. My wife whispered, "Do you hear that?" We both held our breath. The sound came again, closer now, and then a deep snort. The unmistakable sound of a large animal exhaling through its nose. I'd heard bears before, far off, but never this close. The smell followed next, musky, sour, and wild. I reached for the bear spray canister beside the tent door, my heart hammering so hard it felt like it might wake the kids. We'd done everything right. Food locked in the bear box, no crumbs near camp, even the cooking gear scrubbed clean. But something had still brought it here. The silhouette passed through the tent wall shadow. Massive shoulders, slow gait. The animal huffed again, just feet away. From the other tent, a small voice whispered, "Dad?" My blood turned to ice. "Stay quiet, buddy," I hissed as calmly as I could. "Don't move." Every instinct screamed to go to them, but I knew any sudden motion could trigger a reaction. My wife's hand gripped my wrist, grounding me in place. The bear, if it was a bear, moved toward the picnic table, the metal clink of our camp stove echoing like thunder. I slowly unzipped the tent flap, inch by inch, trying not to make a sound. Outside, under the faint wash of moonlight, a grizzly disbelief. My wife leaned against me, her voice just above a whisper. "That was a grizzly, wasn't it?" I nodded, still staring into the tree line where it had vanished. The night felt too big suddenly, like every shadow might be watching us back. I waited another minute before stepping fully out of the tent. The air was sharp with pine and the faint musk the bear had left behind. My flashlight beam cut across our campsite. The stove was on its side, the cooler untouched, one of the camp chairs flattened under an enormous paw print. The kids' tent was perfectly still, zipped tight. I crossed the clearing, forcing my boots to move slow and steady. Inside, both of them were wide-eyed, bundled together in their sleeping bags like a pair of frightened chipmunks. "Is it gone?" my daughter whispered. I smiled and nodded, though my heart was still racing. "Yeah, sweetheart, it's gone. We did everything right, remember? You're safe." We all sat up for a long while after that, talking quietly and keeping the lantern low. The forest outside seemed to breathe with us, branches creaking, wind whispering, far-off night birds calling. Every sound made my muscles tighten, but nothing else came near. Around midnight, I went to check the perimeter again, just to be sure. The bear had moved off down the slope toward the creek. I could see the prints clearly in the moonlight, massive impressions leading into the brush. When I finally lay back down, I couldn't sleep. My wife drifted off beside me, but my mind wouldn't stop replaying the sight of that animal. The power in its shoulders, the intelligence in its eyes, the quiet menace in the way it moved. I realized then how small we really were out there. Tiny islands of warmth and light surrounded by endless dark wilderness. It wasn't fear so much as awe that kept me awake after that. I'd seen bears before from the safety of a car or a distant ridge, but never like this. Never as a reminder that we were visitors in their world, tolerated but not belonging. Eventually, the first hint of dawn touched the tops of the trees, painting the forest in cold, the rhythmic swish of boiling water, the pop of sap in the firewood, the quiet shuffle of my wife emerging from the tent. She gave me a tired half smile, hair tousled, eyes shadowed. "Coffee?" she asked, though she knew the answer. The kids stumbled out soon after, blinking in the soft light. My son tried to act brave, kicking at the dirt near the flattened chair. "He was big," he said, voice low, reverent almost. My daughter, usually talkative, just nodded, her gaze drifting to the paw prints still visible near the picnic table. We all stood around them for a while, no one speaking, just looking. The prints seemed impossibly large, like something carved into the earth itself. We decided to make breakfast simple, oatmeal and dried fruit. The bear's visit had left everything scattered, but thankfully nothing destroyed. My wife moved efficiently, checking the food barrels, the cooler, and even the bear box just to be sure. "He knew there was nothing easy to get," she said. "Just curious, maybe hungry." I stirred the oatmeal, listening to the forest beyond our camp. The usual chatter of squirrels had returned, a few woodpeckers drumming in the distance. Even the sound of the creek was comforting again, that steady murmur threading through the trees. Still, the weight of the night lingered. Every time a twig snapped, my heart jumped before I could stop it. I noticed the kids staying close to the fire, reluctant to wander off, even for firewood. My wife caught my eye and gave a small nod. She felt it too, that invisible tension that takes time to fade. After breakfast, we cleaned up carefully, making sure no trace of food or scent was left behind. Then I gathered the family and went over the bear safety routine again. No food in tents, no scraps near camp. Loud voices if you spot anything. The kids listened more closely this time than they ever had before. Later that morning, we took a short walk down to the creek. The air was bright and clean, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine needles. The kids skipped stones, and for the first time since the night, didn't feel right. The kids helped me gather wood while my wife sorted our gear, making sure everything was sealed tight. Every clang of a pot or creak of a cooler latch sounded sharper than usual, but no one mentioned it. We all felt it, that sense that the forest was listening. The day was bright, the kind of high country sunlight that turns the pine needles into emerald glass. Chipmunks darted between roots, birds swooped through the clearing, and somewhere upriver, a woodpecker tapped out a steady rhythm. It was hard to believe that only hours earlier, that same forest had felt like the edge of the world. Still, as I gathered wood, I noticed claw marks high on a nearby tree. Fresh ones, deep grooves running through the bark. Territorial, I murmured to myself. It wasn't just passing through. This was its home. When we sat down for lunch, cheese, jerky, apples, we talked about what happened. My daughter wanted to know if the bear was mad at us. No, I told her. He just wanted to make sure we weren't taking something that belonged to him. My son nodded solemnly, like that explanation made sense. It did, in a way. Out here, we were the strangers, and the rules weren't ours to write. That afternoon, we went for a cautious walk along the ridge, staying close together and making noise as we moved. I clapped and talked louder than usual, mostly for the kids' benefit, partly for my own nerves. We saw no sign of the bear, just deer tracks, a flicker of movement in the brush that turned out to be a fox, and the distant echo of thunder somewhere far beyond the mountains. By the time we made it back to camp, the clouds had gathered into heavy, bruised layers across the sky. We built the fire early, partly for warmth, partly for comfort. The flames cracked and danced, their light throwing long shadows across the ground where those paw prints had been. My wife made cocoa, and for a while, the fear turned into a kind of pride. We'd faced something ancient and powerful, and still sat here together under the same stars. A little wiser, a little humbler. When night came again, the forest grew quiet, but not silent. The usual chirps and hoots returned. Sleeping bags. But I was wide awake, stirred by that quiet energy that always comes after surviving something that could have gone another way. My wife emerged soon after, wrapping her jacket tight and giving me that small, knowing smile only someone who shared the same long night could give. Neither of us spoke for a while. Words felt too small for what we'd felt, and too heavy for the calm that followed. When the kids woke, we made breakfast slowly, savouring the last meal before breaking camp. My son pointed toward the tree line and said softly, "He's out there somewhere." I looked too, half expecting to see a shape between the trunks. Nothing but the slow sway of branches and the shimmer of light on wet leaves. "Yeah," I said, "and we'll let him keep it." My daughter giggled at that, her fear replaced with a kind of awe. That felt right. I wanted them to respect the wild, not fear it. We packed deliberately. No rush, no chatter, just the steady rhythm of zippers and ropes and folding canvas. Every action felt like part of a quiet ritual. Before we left, I walked once more to the edge of camp. The claw marks on the tree were still visible, catching the morning sun. I ran my fingers over them, feeling the rough edges, imagining the weight behind each stroke. It wasn't malice, just a reminder. This was his country, and we'd been lucky guests. The trail out was narrow and dappled with light, and as we hiked, I could feel the tension melting away with each step. The kids started talking again, about pancakes when we got home, about the silly way Dad said, "Hey bear," and laughter finally chased away the last of the night's fear. My wife reached for my hand, giving it a squeeze that said everything. Pride, relief, love, and maybe a hint of, let's pick a campground with bathrooms next time. When we reached the truck, we turned for one last look at the valley below. The forest stretching endless and quiet under the blue Montana sky. The world out there was vast and wild and beautiful. And for a moment, I felt something close to reverence.